chosen ones, when your name echoed through the secure chambers beneath Geneva, time didn't just pause, it recoiled. Transcripts show that the moment your name was whispered by a delegate from a forgotten tribe, the president's expression changed. Cameras stopped recording. Interpreters fell silent. It wasn't protocol. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that overrules global protocol, cancels billion-dollar deals mid-sentence, and forces world leaders to retreat behind red walls and reinforced doors. You were not meant to be spoken of there, not in that summit, not in this age, but the name came through anyway, etched into the margins of an artifact smuggled out of an ancient tomb days before. The delegate who read it reportedly collapsed. Security swept the room for biohazards. There were none. Just the echo of a name that wasn't supposed to be remembered until the final alignment. Yours. Across continents, encrypted systems flared red. Files once buried under 7 seals unlocked. A classified codex titled Anomaly Delta, the living variable, was retrieved by the president's advisor. It referenced a figure born not from lineage, but from disruption. The only line underlined in red: he will not fit any existing schema. He is the schema. Satellite feeds from 3 major agencies registered something else at the same moment: your location. Not just physical, but energetic. A radiant pulse from your last breath during meditation, or perhaps just a dream. The frequency matched an event last seen during the fall of Atlantis, and the Vatican's observatory confirmed it. The anomaly was not astral, it was incarnate. While the public narrative mentioned a technical glitch, what truly occurred was a chain reaction in the spiritual and geopolitical planes. You are now marked in both, and they are watching every step, every thought, every vibration. But they don't understand. They weren't meant to. Only you hold the resonance key. And now, whispers rise from within the sealed catacombs of the summit's archives. They say, if your name is spoken again, the next summit will never open. The world will wait for you. The summit room was engineered to withstand nuclear threats, cyber interference, and even psychic anomalies, but nothing prepared them for what came when your name reached the air. It didn't pass through lips like any other name. It altered the current, almost like the fabric of sound folded in on itself. Those seated around the circular table, men and women who controlled continents, didn't speak or react. They stared. Every screen in the room, from holographic projections to encrypted data feeds, flickered and went black in perfect sync. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. It was as if the world's pulse had been paused from outside time itself. A technician rushed in, then stopped halfway through the security door, muttering that the biometric systems had locked up. Not failed. Locked up. Meaning something had accessed the control framework with permissions above top-level clearances. The president stood, not in command, but in disbelief, as if he'd seen this before, not in reality, but in a vision, or perhaps a warning passed down between presidencies. One of the intelligence heads slid a folder forward, hand trembling. It was black with no insignia, only a burn mark on the upper right corner. The folder had no hinges or staples, but as it opened, it revealed a still image. Your face, aged, untouched by time. You hadn't been born yet when the photo was taken. The lights above began to dim, not from power loss, but like something was feeding off the current, drinking the voltage of the moment. The translator from the Eastern Bloc began murmuring in a dialect that hadn't been spoken for centuries. He didn't know the language, and when he snapped out of it, he asked what just happened, as if no time had passed at all. There were murmurs of canceling the summit, but no one left the room. They feared leaving would mean missing the next sign, and in that silence, something more profound echoed. The unexplainable had stepped inside their fortress of logic, and your name had become the key that no one could deny. Then came the pulse, so subtle yet so loud it cracked the glass of one observer's lens without shattering the frame. Something had arrived, but nothing had yet moved. Far beneath the summit chambers, where diplomatic discussions usually echo above layers of security and bedrock, something ancient began to stir. The Vatican's covert sensors, embedded in catacombs no one publicly acknowledges, detected a sudden pressure shift beneath Geneva. A hum, low and resonant, like the groaning of a forgotten giant turning in its sleep. The seal was supposed to be eternal, etched with sigils predating even Rome, bound in rites lost to all but a few. But the moment your name entered the room above, it opened. Not with force, not with violence. It simply yielded, like a servant recognizing a master after thousands of years apart. Technicians working underground were the first to see it. A camera, dead for decades, blinked to life and streamed a single frame, an archway glowing faintly blue, previously buried under layers of stone and electromagnetic silence. No one had a key. No one had coordinates for it. But there it was, reactivated, acknowledged, alive. And inside that sealed chamber was something no one expected to find. A scroll hovering in midair, untouched by dust or decay, with a single line written across it in ancient Aramaic. The translation was delayed only because the scholars needed confirmation of a word they thought impossible. When the deciphering was complete, it read, "And he shall return in flesh that does not fade, when the world forgets who he is." The energy signature from the chamber matched one previously logged at a monastic site in Galilee, where a stone fragment with Yeshua's name had pulsed during a solar anomaly decades ago. It wasn't just an echo. It was an anchor, a convergence point. And now it was vibrating beneath the epicenter of global power, not metaphorically, literally. Military advisors were briefed within minutes, but none gave the order to descend. Something held them back, something unspoken. Fear, yes, but not the human kind. It was reverence disguised as terror, because deep within their ancestral memory, they knew this wasn't just a discovery. It was a return, something that had been sealed by design until the appointed name passed through the world's highest seat of unity. He wasn't on the official list. No credentials, no invitation, not even a trace in the digital records of the summit's global entry logs. And yet, there he stood, cloaked in gray, posture calm, eyes reflecting something more ancient than memory. A scar ran from his right ear down to the edge of his collarbone, jagged and pale, like it had been carved by time itself rather than a blade. He didn't enter through the main doors. Witnesses say he was already inside when the screens went dark, sitting in the shadows, unnoticed, as if waiting for the moment your name would rise. When the chaos subsided, and no one could explain what just occurred, he stepped forward, not as a threat, but as someone reclaiming a story. He spoke in a cadence that felt older than language, but everyone understood him, not through words, but through resonance. He spoke of you, not by name, but by essence. The one who would shake dimensions without lifting a hand. The one who would be erased from the archives of men, but tattooed across the memory of time. They asked him who he was, but he gave no answer. Only this: I have waited 3 lifetimes to witness the trigger point, and now it walks again. Documents across the table curled at the edges as if exposed to invisible heat. Pens rolled toward him. The ceiling lights above flickered once, then glowed blue. No one moved. No one dared to interrupt. His scar seemed to glow faintly when he spoke your destiny, as though it was not a wound but a symbol, something earned. When he finished, he reached into his sleeve and pulled out a coin. Not currency, a seal. Blackened metal with inscriptions that shifted depending on who looked at it. He set it gently on the table and said, "This only appears when the cycle nears completion. You have 33 days." The coin pulsed once, then turned to ash before their eyes. The man turned and walked toward the far wall, and as he stepped forward, he vanished. Not teleported, not hidden, simply removed, like a page from a book that was never meant to be read. The phrase wasn't spoken aloud. It appeared on the summit's central holoscreen. In crimson script, no one recognized it first. The language was fragmented Aramaic, matching the dialect of the scroll discovered beneath Geneva just hours prior. It shouldn't have shown up. The entire system was offline, power rerouted, firewalls locked, and yet there it was, unbidden and burning bright. He carries the mark of the Nazarene. A priest assigned to diplomatic observation stood trembling at the back of the room. His role had always been ceremonial, a silent presence meant to offer moral balance to policy. But when he saw the script, he fell to his knees. He whispered something between sobs, repeating a name only those who studied the sacred texts in silence would dare to utter outside of Scripture. Yeshua. He claimed the mark had returned, not on the skin, but within the light of the blood. A signature of divine rebellion buried in mortal flesh. He told them of an old prophecy that never made it into the canon. One hidden in the writings of a desert mystic who claimed he saw the return of the Messiah not through clouds or trumpet blasts, but through a human born without record, who would speak in vibration rather than doctrine. His presence alone would divide empires and reassemble broken timelines, not because of what he said, but because of what he reminded the world it had forgotten. Security demanded the feed be cut. They tried, but every terminal displayed the same line again, looping slowly like it was being breathed rather than coded. He carries the mark of the Nazarene. The president hadn't spoken since the pulse. His eyes locked on the screen, jaw clenched, knuckles white. He recognized the mark, not from religion, from memory. He once saw it drawn on the wall of a monastery in his youth during a secret tour in Bethlehem. That wall later vanished in a fire deemed accidental. A call was made to a secure line within the Vatican. The response was instant. They had been waiting for this day, not with panic, with preparation. Because the one who bore the mark would not come to seek power, but to dismantle the systems that claimed to wield it. The agenda distributed at the summit had passed through multiple clearance levels, sealed and encrypted before ever reaching the hands of the delegates. It was standard protocol, every page scanned, verified, watermarked. Yet somehow, one page was not accounted for. Page 13. It wasn't in the physical packets. It wasn't in the digital archives. But just after the pulse, when the room's light returned to normal and the machinery hummed quietly back to life, one delegate from the African Union opened his binder to find an extra sheet. Smooth, cold, black ink that shimmered like oil under artificial light. No one could explain how it got there. It wasn't printed on any known stock. The lettering was angular, precise, and translated itself depending on who read it. Each leader saw different text, but the message was always the same: a directive, a timeline, and a warning. The president ordered a lockdown. The page was placed in a biometric containment case, but before it was sealed, someone had already taken a photo. Not on their device, on their skin. The text had burned into the palm of a delegate without touch or intent. He didn't feel pain. He felt awareness, as if the page had not just been read, but had read him. Back in the Situation Room, analysts tried to trace the paper's origin. The fibers didn't match anything modern. Carbon dating failed. It returned a paradoxical result, suggesting the page was both 2,000 years old and printed 48 hours ago. The ink responded to heat not by fading, but by shifting into moving symbols, stars, gates, and at the center, your face, flickering between past and future forms. A child, a sage, a silhouette walking through fire. One line appeared at the bottom for less than 2 seconds before vanishing entirely. It said, "The Hidden One returns not to lead, but to expose the architects." The phrase echoed through the minds of those present long after it disappeared. Some delegates denied seeing anything. Others requested immediate evacuation. But most stayed, hypnotized by the magnitude of the moment. Because if the summit had been manipulated to deliver that page, then the real agenda hadn't started yet. It had only been activated the moment you were remembered. He was one of the few allowed direct access to the sealed archives beneath Castel Gandolfo. Trained in silence, fluent in ancient tongues, and bound by a vow that predated the modern church, the courier's role was not to interpret, only to deliver. Yet, when the hidden page surfaced at the summit, the Vatican requested it be handed over immediately. The courier arrived by diplomatic jet, unnoticed by press, escorted through underground corridors of Geneva. He held a relic in his palm, a ring once worn by a desert ascetic, said to have seen the True One walk across time in flesh. The courier reviewed the page privately in a chamber lined with shielding, spiritual and electromagnetic. The feed from the observation lens showed him sitting upright, scanning the text with a calm, focused gaze. But at precisely 3:03 a.m., something shifted. The video feed shimmered like heat waves, colors distorting, audio warping into a low hum. Then, without warning, he was gone. No sign of struggle, no breach in the walls, no noise. One frame he existed, next frame he didn't. All that remained on the chair was the ring, pulsing with faint heat. No trace of the courier's DNA was left behind. Forensic teams confirmed he had simply ceased to occupy physical space. What unsettled the investigators more was what appeared next. Etched into the floor beneath the chair were 7 interlocking symbols, each one correlating to early messianic seals, most of which had been struck from historical record. And at the center, a mark that matched the one believed to have been engraved on Yeshua's burial cloth, a spiral intersecting a flame. A Vatican representative reviewed the footage and whispered something to herself, unaware the mic was live. When later translated, her words were, "He has been taken into the fold. The witness has returned to the source." The remaining clergy present fell into prayer, not for the courier, but for what his disappearance confirmed. They believed the seal beneath Geneva was not the only one awakening. Across the world, other sanctums, hidden below mosques, temples, and mountains, had begun reporting similar anomalies, and they all pointed to one thing. It wasn't stored on any server. It wasn't in a vault or etched onto stone. The map appeared as a projection on the inside of a delegate's eyelids during a brief blackout following the courier's disappearance. He described it as both a vision and a sensation, as if his bloodstream had become a thread connecting locations, symbols, and faces he had never known but somehow recognized. When he awoke, he sketched the lines frantically onto a notepad, his hand moving faster than thought. What emerged was not a traditional map, but a sequence of geometric patterns laid across the globe. Cities, mountain peaks, deserts, and ruins, all aligned to a path no known satellite had ever recorded. The pattern was familiar to an elder cryptographer in the intelligence wing. He retrieved a restricted codex called the Crown Line, theorized to track a lineage so pure and untouched it had escaped every form of historic manipulation. Blood that resisted programming, DNA sequences that vibrated outside the standard human range. The map from the vision matched the Crown Line perfectly, but it went further, adding 7 new nodes, each corresponding to prophetic birth sites long considered mythical. At the heart of the map was a point that didn't exist on any charted terrain, a blank spot near the border of an abandoned territory known for unusual magnetic pulses. And in that center was a symbol that required no translation, a fingerprint. Yours, not in ink or image, but in frequency. The pattern matched the energy spike recorded the day your name was spoken at the summit. The frequency itself was traced back and cross-checked through deep surveillance satellites. It hadn't been emitted. It had awakened. Buried beneath mountains, oceans, and centuries of diversion. The president ordered the full decoding of the map, but every attempt failed. The lines rearranged themselves based on who looked at them. To some, it was a bloodline. To others, a weapon. To a select few, it was a return signal. A countdown in reverse, not marking a future event, but revealing one that had already occurred outside time. And in the lower corner of the delegate's original sketch, an odd phrase appeared. The phrase came from a woman no one remembered inviting. She wasn't on any list, wore no credentials, and yet she stood at the summit's outer perimeter, staring toward the sealed chamber below. Her eyes shimmered with a strange stillness, like she wasn't watching the present unfold, but witnessing a memory replay. When security approached her, she didn't flinch. She simply whispered, "As it was in Galilee," and everything around her shifted. Wind swept through the underground corridors, though no doors were open. Lights dimmed, then pulsed with a soft gold hue. The guards hesitated. Something in them recognized the tone, not the words, but the authority behind them. A theologian assigned to the summit was summoned. When he heard the phrase, he fell silent. It was a fragment from an unrecorded gospel once found in fragments at Qumran, and then lost again during the Cold War. That phrase marked a section foretelling the return of one who carried a light not born of flame, but of remembrance. A light that had walked among fishermen and the forgotten. One that would return not to preach, but to disrupt the illusion of division. The woman was brought inside, and with every step she took, security feeds distorted for exactly 7 seconds. She wasn't afraid. She asked to see the map. When presented with the delegate's sketch, she smiled faintly and said it had been seen before, in a cave near Mount Arbel, where Yeshua was believed to have prayed in silence. She said the lines weren't merely bloodlines, they were echoes, memories of a spirit that chose to scatter itself across time, knowing that only when the world forgot its source would the fragments begin to return. She revealed nothing about herself except a symbol she wore on a chain around her neck. It matched the spiral intersecting the flame, the same symbol etched on the floor where the Vatican courier had vanished. She said it wasn't a mark of faith. It was a seal of witness, one that activates when the Nazarene's echo finds embodiment once more. And then, without sound or motion, she was no longer in the room. No one saw her leave. But the scent of myrrh lingered behind her, ancient and unmistakable. It happened without warning. No countdown, no signal. Just a sudden jolt felt simultaneously by defense satellites, deep ocean monitoring systems, and the subconscious minds of select individuals tied to Black Ops intuition programs. The pulse wasn't seismic, atmospheric, or nuclear. It was frequency-based, coded with emotion, memory, and something deeper, something alive. Across the globe, every sensor tuned to quantum resonance registered a synchronized spike. The signature matched no known entity, except one. The reading bore striking similarity to the energy anomaly recorded over Bethlehem 2 millennia ago. Within the Pentagon's secured archives, a file labeled Omega Watch had remained unopened for decades, locked behind biometric encryption, requiring triple verified alignment: presidential, ecclesiastical, and AI. The moment the pulse struck, the file opened on its own. It contained a single video loop, an empty cradle beneath a dark sky, lightning behind it forming a symbol in the clouds, the spiral and flame again, glowing briefly before dissolving. Beneath the video were 2 words in red: "He walks." Protocol Omega was not a plan. It was a response, a recognition. Across continents, bunkers were sealed. Certain individuals were activated. Ancient relics long thought ceremonial were removed from their hiding places. This wasn't a call to arms. It was a call to remember. Every agency, every faith-based intelligence wing, every underground order understood it in their own way, but none denied it. Someone had awakened a frequency buried beneath the world's rhythm, a song the earth hadn't heard since time bent for a carpenter's son on a hill. In isolated monasteries, bells rang without hands. In deserts, sand formed spiral shapes without wind. And in the deepest vault of the European Defense Ministry, a mirror blacker than night began to reflect a face that wasn't standing in front of it. Your face, timeless, weathered, eyes lit with knowledge no language could carry. The mirror cracked once across the center, but didn't break. Some leaders met in emergency calls, others fled to their private sanctuaries, but a few stood silent, understanding what had begun was no longer theirs to control. The pulse was not a threat. It was an announcement. The veil had been touched. The secure channel hadn't been used in years. It required a biometric handshake, combined with an analog key known only to the sitting president, and one other soul whose name had been removed from all living documentation. When the pulse struck and the map was drawn, the president retreated to the subterranean vault beneath the embassy wing, where light was synthetic and time ran differently. He activated the channel alone, bypassing even his most trusted advisors. The screen didn't flicker. It pulsed, soft white at first, then a deep violet hue, as if the device wasn't receiving a signal but remembering one. The message was already waiting, time-stamped precisely 1 minute before your name had been spoken aloud. The footage wasn't a warning. It wasn't a prophecy. It was a recording of the president himself, older, wearier, with lines that hadn't formed yet. In the message, he didn't speak about policy, war, or peace. He spoke only of you. He described your presence, the way rooms bend subtly when you enter, how your breath carries the weight of vanished centuries. He spoke of seeing you once, as a child, walking alone in a place that shouldn't exist anymore. He whispered of dreams shared by world leaders, where you walked among ancient ruins as a guide, not a ruler. You never gave commands. You simply stood, and by standing, caused others to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. He referenced a phrase carved into stone beneath the old chapel of St. John's Monastery. He will be unknown, and yet all will know him when the silence breaks. Near the end of the message, his expression changed. He leaned closer to the lens, almost trembling. "You're not what we feared," he said. "You're what we forgot how to accept." Then the feed cut to static, and the channel closed for good. Attempts to retrieve the recording failed. It no longer existed in the system. But one word remained on the screen, not typed, but etched from within the glass: return. Outside, the summit rooms were quiet. The delegates had dispersed, but deep below, where the seal once opened, the scroll was no longer floating. It had unraveled,